Thank you very much. I guess he's pulling up the presentation. But before he does, I'd just like to thank the committee and everyone for the invitation. Also, I'd like to thank my lovely wife for joining me today, Andrea. Also, our children back home, our family. So definitely, we appreciate it. Um, all right. So today I'm going to discuss diversity, inclusion, and belonging. So this presentation is based on an article that I wrote in 2020 on the same subject. And, you know, 2020, a lot of things were going on, COVID, et cetera, still going on. But it's very timely today, given the fact that what we're dealing with in the state of Florida. We have a governor, Ron DeSantis. He's putting forth initiatives, legislation to eliminate diversity in inclusion and belonging, things that were in place before, and so he's putting forth a lot of legislation right now at a state level to eliminate those initiatives. So very timely. Go to the next slide. All right, so let's talk about diversity. So diversity, inclusion, and belonging has a symbiotic but complicated relationship in America, right? The foundation of this complication is due in part to the social order in which whites are the dominant group in every major sector of society, while non-whites, particularly African Americans, which I identify as, are at the bottom, very bottom. Next slide. Order. So this social order is also mirrored in organizational structures in which whites in position of leadership project their culture of dominance within the organization. So this has a profound effect on non-whites, especially upon African Americans within this structure, who may feel that they must be inauthentic while associated with the organization and or entities to survive. So basically what I'm saying here is that, we have a lot of these initiatives, diversity. You hear it all the time, right? But in the majority of these organizations is white dominated, right? Whether it be a case of the majority of the organization is comprised of whites, or it might be a case where it's not the majority is comprised by whites, but the structure was put in place by whites, enacted by whites. So it really creates this conundrum here, because in America, it's a very segregated society, even up to this point. Of course, people have the right to live where they want to live, to choose where they want to live, but due to economic structures, that's not necessarily the case. And so you have a situation here where, Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. once said that the most segregated hour in America is Sunday at 11 a.m., right? Because, you go to your place of worship or communal whatever with the groups that you associated with. And so what we're saying here is that in looking at that context, then most whites do not interact with African Americans on a daily basis, other than in a position of, or the African American is in a position of subservience to that structure in some way, shape, or form. Even if they're in middle management, even if they're in upper management, you still have to answer to someone who doesn't look like you. Okay. All right. Next slide. Oh, okay. He left. Okay. Okay. There we go. All right. The other way. Okay. All right. All right. So let's get some statistics in here. According to the U.S. Census Bureau, in 2019, 76% of Americans identified as white, including those of Latino descent, while 13.4% identified as black. So when we say identified as black, you have a good amount of that percentage identify as African American. Some may identify as maybe Caribbean black, maybe African black, but for the most part in America, when you're black, you're black. and most likely you're going to be treated as if you are a descendant as far as African Americans, so descendant from slavery. So the overall majority of Americans identifying as white may be an inherent reason as to why there is a significant disparity between white and black people in organizations as employees and as leaders. All right, so let's talk about management. So according to the U.S. Bureau of Labor Statistics 2020, 84% of those in management positions in structured organizations overall identify as white, while 88% of those in chief executive positions, CEO positions, also identify as white. So furthermore, the Center for Talent Innovation found that only 0.08% of Fortune 500 chief executive officers were black, and only 3.2% of those in senior level and executive positions were also black. So you see the conundrum here, as we were saying before, 88% versus less than 1% as far as CEO, and as far as in less than 4% as far as in senior level positions. So the NCS also reports that in 2019, for the 259,986 management positions in all higher education institutions, 195,243, or 75%, were occupied by white people. Meanwhile, 26,515, or 10% of management positions were filled by black people. So you see the disparity not only in Fortune 500 organizations in corporate America, corporations, but also in higher education institutions. So since most management and executive positions are occupied by white people, diversity for the purpose of filling leadership positions in American organizations begins and ends at the recruitment stage. So according to Hirsch and Zio, 2016, only 34% of African Americans reported that they were satisfied with their jobs, compared with 48% of white people. So Talent Innovation also found that 65% of African Americans in the workplace feel that they must work harder to advance in their organization, while only 16% of white people felt this way. And obviously that's the effects due to racism, also the effects due to sexism, when it concerns to African American women, you know, the intersectionality between race and sex. So again, in looking at this, my grandma and my parents and my elders always used to tell me growing up, you're black and you're a black man, and you're gonna always have to work twice as hard to maybe even 10 times as hard to even get to half of the position as someone who is white, right? No matter if they're a white male or white woman or a white man, it doesn't matter. You're gonna have to work 10 times as hard to even get to half of to where they're at. And what they were talking about specifically, not only just in titles, anybody can have a title, but we're also talking about the economic piece of that as well. That's the key, because when people throw around the word diversity, it's like, okay, diversity in what? What are we talking about here? You could give me a title, but what about the money? Money on the wood. That's the universal language here. And there's a big economic disparity as far as the money is concerned between blacks and whites. Career advancement. So again, this may lead to African Americans also feeling that they must play the token role for advancement, and thus causing them to feel they cannot genuinely be themselves in the workplace. So this result may also lead to a higher rate of African Americans intending to leave their jobs, reflected in studies on work and leadership conducted by Roberts, Mayo, and Thomas. So in their research, they found that African Americans respondents reported the lowest levels in several of the career outcome variables. So African Americans had the lowest level of commitment, the lowest level of job fit, and the highest intention of leaving. So what happens here? So you create a situation where feeling like they don't belong in the organization. So they feel like they have to go and look for another job. Well, if you're going from job to job to job to job, what does that create? That creates a certain type of instability, right? instability. So not every job pays the same. Of course, when you leave from job to job, you want to have at least, you want to make a little bit more than what you did previously, but sometimes that might not always be the case. So sometimes you're forced to take a job that's lower paying, but you want to feel happy. You want to feel like you have more time to do things with your family, with your children. Especially this is a big issue, especially as it pertains to African American women, with the percentage of those who are head of household, head of their household. So think about it. So with the head of household, and then in thinking about the prospects of not being happy at the job, okay, so now I got to apply for a job or several jobs, and it's a job within a job to apply for a job. So again, all of these things are impactful. So the result is the management styles of these organizations are incompatible with the lived experience of African Americans. This then may cause African Americans to feel that they have no choice but to either conform to the culture, which is not of theirs, but of the dominant society of the organization, by taking on performative behaviors rather than being genuine in their day-to-day interactions, or simply leave within 2 years of being hired. And again, that creates an instability, and especially an economic instability. So this is reflected in the Center for Talent Innovation, which found that 35% of black professionals plan to leave their job within 2 years of being hired, compared with only 27% of white people. So tokenism. So African Americans who may be in management positions are expected to be what? The representatives of their race, and may even be asked to act as a horse whisperer between white administrators and lower level black employees. So Roberts and Mayo note this phenomenon by explaining that many black professionals have reported to Togo that they are expected to be cultural ambassadors who address the needs of other black employees, which leaves them doing what? 2 jobs. The official one the person was hired to do, and a second one as champion for members of the person's leadership, as one put it. So again, so you're doing double duty, right? So you're expected to do your job to the tip-top performance, to keep getting that check, right? So you're not getting fired or demoted or what have you. But at the same time, you're still expected to be a representative of your race. You're expected to basically translate, okay, what did those people say? And that's additional work. So even as a senior lecturer of African American studies, obviously I do research and I teach, but also what's not said is the service component that I do much more than my white colleagues. Because, it's only a few of us that are African American on campus, and especially black men on campus that are in positions the position that I'm in. So, so I'm taking on additional responsibility that my counterparts necessarily do not have to take. And it's the same example for my women counterparts as well. There's only but so few professors on campus who are women, are black women, and so then you have your students, a lot of black women students that come and for support or what have you. So it's additional labor that's not calculated in the FTE. So fragility. Let's talk about fragility, especially in the workplace. So white fragility is conceptualized by Robin DiAngelo in a statement: when ideologies such as colorblindness, meritocracy, and individualism are challenged, intense emotional reactions are common. So furthermore, the outward display of emotions such as anger, fear, and guilt, and behaviors such as argumentation, silence, and leaving the stress-induced situation. So these behaviors in turn function to reinstate white racial equilibrium, where racial stress results from an interruption to what is racially familiar. So let's take a step back what we're talking about here. What Robin DiAngelo is talking about here is that, let's say there's a African American in middle management position, right? And they come to their superior, who may be white, with a concern. Like, hey, I have a concern. This is what's going on. This is what we need to do to remedy the situation. For whatever reason, it may offend the superior, and so then they respond with the range of emotions basically to center themselves as the victim of the situation, right? And then they may also respond with passive-aggressive tactics. You know, you get reprimanded for this and that, for little things that maybe the other people may not get reprimanded for. You know, so these are the things that Robin DiAngelo are talking about with white fragility, that especially African Americans have to face on a day-to-day basis in all positions of leadership. Obviously, unless they're the CEO, which we've already said that's as far as Fortune 500, that's less than 1% in America. So in conclusion, I know it's so much more I could talk about. The paper is very extensive, but I just want to conclude here that diversity, inclusion, and belonging in the era of President Donald Trump and beyond, so now we're in President Biden, in America must be a genuine endeavor that allows organizations and society to be transformed by the perspectives of the individuals that are non-white, especially African Americans. So as it pertains to African Americans, the base of this transformation must start with white people in American society, allowing this community to develop a sense of identity and not ostracizing it if it chooses not to conform to the ideals and values of the larger dominant hegemonic society. So if this is accomplished, diversity, inclusion, and belonging will become a natural disposition in organizations as well as in all sectors of society. This will then eliminate the need for special programs and initiatives to be instituted for diversity purposes, and thus allow non-whites and especially African Americans to feel that they naturally belong to and are a part of the organization and society. Thank you. Right.
We don't see a lot of disparity between the differences versus in America there's a huge disparity.
Right.
So this is an international conference, and I think it's important to help people understand the culture
Right.
in America
Right.
versus the rest of the world.
Right. Well, the culture in America is based on white supremacy. And when I say that, what I'm saying here is that America, obviously, in a lot of countries, but especially America, was built on the enslavement of African people, people of African descent, right? And so that foundation is still there in America, because you have to think about this. African Americans were still second-class citizens up until 1968. So that's, some of us was born before 1968 in this room. So it's still very fresh. It's very fresh. And then so you have to account for the economic piece as well, right? Not to say that a person of African-American descent can't, make a conscious effort to do for themselves, et cetera, et cetera. They can do that. I have done that. But they're still going to be subjective to racism. And so that's the main difference when we're talking about the culture in America as it pertains to the differences between white Americans and African Americans, is racism. It's something that can never be eradicated. It's never going to be gotten rid of. It's never, ever will. So, again, so that's why I argue in this paper, to help remedy that, especially when we're talking about diversity. Because, again, you hear that it's so thrown around so much in America, oh, diversity, diversity, diversity. But it's like, are you really ready to challenge your beliefs as it pertains to race? And a lot of that is probably, like I said, I teach African American studies. I'm very passionate about this. But to conclude the question, a lot of this has been propagated over the years through media, through movies, through music, through policies, as I said before, 1968 with the Fair Housing Act was passed in 1968, and still things going on today where that differences in the culture remains. So that's the issue.
I want to say phenomenal presentation. Thank you. Because usually when you have diversity and inclusion presentations, it's kind of like the Disneyland tour, right?
Right.
You slap in a black face on
Right.
a photo and call it a day, or Beyonce. So what I'm hearing from your presentation and what I appreciate about it is because it's really rooted in systems of oppression. And I really appreciated the portion that you talked about the invisible labor that people, like that's not what allyship is.
Right.
It's trying to put more labor on the people who are oppressed.
Right.
To educate on history and whatnot. So my question is what are the tangible steps for allyship for others who are not African American? Like what can people actually do? And I think about this in the context of education because in America, books on African American history are being banned.
Yes.
Or books about racism
Especially in Florida, where
are being banned.
yes.
So what is your version of allyship? Where do people start?
I think where people can start, especially non-whites, and especially those who are also of African descent in some way, who may come from the Caribbean or African countries, and they come to America like, what's going? It starts with listening. Listening, you know, not interjecting, being an active listener. You know, the communication has to be there, and effective communication starts with listening, right? So I think that's the first step, and I think the second step is that you know, the advocacy portion, genuine advocacy, right? You know, even if you may agree or not agree on something, agree or disagree, right? The issue here is, okay, but what at the end of the day, what are we talking about as it pertains to the policy of this? Let's just say whether it's the company or whether it's, say, in a institutional organization, right? Something happens, you know, it's involving, you know, African Americans or what have you. Okay, but at the end of the day, what is the policy here? You know, and if it's something, a long-standing policy that has been detrimental for, you know, the reason why people of African American descent has been leaving a job or not feeling included, let's come to some solutions to address that, you know, to help the situation. You know, so I think genuine allyship starts, you know, to close it up, starts with listening, and then also effective advocacy, you know, to really open up the conversation, you know. And I think that's it's just keep it simple, you know. Right, recruitment, yes. Recruitment, yes, sir. Right. 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 Like me, right. Right, right. 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 Yes. 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 Right. Right. It's not gonna happen. Right. Oh yeah. Oh yeah. Oh yeah. Maybe more.